Elara, Duchess of Blackwood, had come to believe that silence had a weight. In the 2 years since her marriage, it had settled over the grand, cold halls of Blackwood Manor like a shroud of fine dust, coating every surface, muffling every footstep. It was a silence born not of peace, but of absence. The absence of laughter, of conversation, of life. Most of all, the absence of her husband. Alistair, the Duke, was a man carved from the same granite as his ancestral home. He was a presence, a power, a name whispered with awe and fear in London drawing-rooms, but he was not a husband. He was the architect of this crushing silence. Their interactions were brief, formal exchanges over a dining table so long it felt like shouting across a valley. He provided for her every material need with meticulous, impersonal precision, but he never once looked at her as if he truly saw her. She was simply another of his possessions, quieter than the suits of armor in the hall, and far less interesting. She had resigned herself to it. Despair had long ago curdled into a quiet, weary acceptance. Her world had shrunk to the conservatory, a glass bubble of warmth and life where she tended to her collection of exotic ferns and orchids. Here, surrounded by the patient, silent growth of living things, she could almost forget the slow decay of her own spirit. She felt more kinship with the delicate, resilient plants than with any person in this house. That Tuesday, a brittle autumn sun had offered a brief, deceptive warmth. Elara had decided to walk the 2 miles to the village. Mistress Albright, the wife of one of their oldest tenants, was suffering from a terrible cough, and Elara had prepared a soothing syrup from honey and thyme grown in her own small herb garden. It was a small act of purpose, a reason to move, to breathe air that did not taste of stone and neglect. She told no one. There was no one to tell. The visit was a small comfort. Mistress Albright's gratitude was a balm, her cosy, cluttered cottage a world away from the echoing emptiness of the manor. Elara stayed longer than she intended, listening to village gossip and sipping weak tea. When she finally departed, she noticed the sky had turned the color of a fresh bruise, the clouds gathering with a sudden, menacing weight. The first drop of rain was cold and fat, landing on her cheek like a tear. Then another, and another. Within minutes, the heavens had opened, unleashing a furious, wind-whipped deluge. The pleasant country lane dissolved into a river of mud that sucked at the hem of her walking dress and tried to steal the thin slippers from her feet. Her bonnet, meant for sun, was a useless, sodden weight. Her hair came loose from its pins, plastering itself to her cheeks and neck in cold, clinging strands. A chill settled deep in her bones, a damp, invasive cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. She trudged onward, her head bowed against the wind, each step a small, miserable victory. The world was a blur of grey rain and churning mud. She heard it before she saw it, the rhythmic thunder of hooves, the churn of heavy wheels slicing through the mire. It was a sound of power, of purpose, of a world that did not have to suffer the indignity of the elements. A carriage, its lacquered black panels gleaming even in the dim, watery light, crested the hill. The Blackwood crest, a silver wolf's head, was emblazoned on the door. His carriage. Her heart gave a strange, painful lurch. A foolish, desperate flicker of hope ignited within her. He would see her. He would stop. He would pull her from the rain and wrap her in a dry blanket, his brow furrowed with concern. For one wild, breathless moment, she allowed herself to imagine it. The carriage drew level with her. Through the rain-streaked window she saw him. Alistair. His profile was sharp, severe, his attention fixed on some papers he held in his hands. He did not look up. He did not turn his head. He was a portrait of ducal focus, utterly absorbed in his own world, a world that did not contain a lone, drenched woman on the side of the road. The carriage did not slow. It swept past her, its wheels throwing an arc of filthy, cold water that soaked her from the waist down, a final, brutal insult. She stood, frozen, watching it recede, a black shape swallowed by the grey curtain of rain. He was gone. He had not seen her, or, if he had seen nothing more than a peasant girl, a piece of the rural scenery, insignificant and unworthy of a second glance. The flicker of hope inside her did not just die, it was extinguished with such finality that it left behind a cold, black ash. It was worse than cruelty. Cruelty, at least, required recognition. This was utter indifference. She was invisible. Something inside her shifted them, a quiet, tectonic movement deep in her soul. The resignation she had lived with for 2 years cracked, and what lay beneath was not sorrow, but something harder, something colder. It was the calm that follows the breaking of a fever. She was no longer waiting for him to see her. She no longer cared if he ever did. The rest of the walk was a blur. She moved automatically, her body numb, her mind a placid, empty space. The rain did not matter. The cold did not matter. When she finally reached the imposing gates of Blackwood Manor, she felt like a ghost returning to her haunting grounds. She slipped in through the gardens, using a small door that led to the servants' corridor, avoiding the grand entrance hall where she might be seen. Her maid, Agnes, a woman whose loyalty was a small, steady flame in the cold darkness of the house, found her shivering in the passage. Agnes's gasp was sharp with alarm. "Your Grace, what has happened? You are soaked to the bone," she whispered, her hands already working to unfasten the sodden cloak. "I was caught in the storm," Ilara said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. She felt strangely disconnected from the chattering of her own teeth. Agnes led her upstairs, clucking with worry. She drew a hot bath, laid out a warm nightgown, and bustled about with an efficiency born of genuine affection. As Ilara sank into the steaming water, the heat was a shock to her frozen limbs. She watched, detached, as the mud from the road swirled away from her skin, turning the clear water cloudy and grey. She was washing away more than just the filth of the journey. She was washing away the last vestiges of the woman who had hoped. By the time Alastair returned, she was dressed for dinner, seated in her customary chair. She wore a simple gown of deep blue velvet. Her hair was coiled neatly at the nape of her neck. To any casual observer, she would have looked exactly as she always did, poised, quiet, the perfect Duchess. He swept into the dining room, bringing with him a gust of cold air and the scent of damp wool. "A wretched evening," he announced to the room at large, stripping off his gloves. "The roads are nearly impassable." He took his seat at the head of the table. The footman began to serve the soup. For a few moments, the only sounds were the clink of silver on porcelain. Alastair glanced down the formidable length of the table toward her. "You are looking rather pale, Ilara. Are you feeling well?" he asked. It was his standard inquiry, delivered with the same detached interest he might use to ask about the health of a prized mare. "I am perfectly well, thank you," she replied. Her voice was a placid stream, smooth and cool. He nodded, accepting her answer without question, and turned his attention to his soup. After a moment, he spoke again, a faint note of irritation in his voice. "The storm came on so suddenly. I was forced to pass a poor woman on the road back from the village. Walking, in this deluge. Can you imagine? Utterly drenched. Some people have no sense." Ilara's spoon paused halfway to her lips. Her fingers tightened around the cool silver. He had seen her. He had registered a shape, a person, a poor woman, and he had thought nothing of it. He had judged her senseless and driven on. The confirmation settled not like a stone in her stomach, but like a sheet of ice forming over a still, deep lake. She placed her spoon carefully beside her bowl. She had no appetite. She looked at him, truly looked at the powerful, handsome stranger at the other end of her table, and felt nothing. Not anger, not hurt, not even disappointment. Just a vast, quiet emptiness. The connection between them A thread she had spent 2 years trying to weave from hope and patience had finally, irrevocably, snapped. The days that followed were marked by a subtle but profound shift in the household's atmosphere. The silence remained, but its quality changed. It was no longer the silence of neglect. It was the silence of intent. Ilara's intent. She ceased to appear for their shared formal meals. She sent word through Agnes that she would be taking her meals in her sitting room, citing a recurring headache. The excuse was flimsy, and she knew he would not believe it, but she also knew he would not challenge it. To challenge it would require a level of engagement he had never been willing to offer. She poured all her energy into her own world. She spent hours in the conservatory, meticulously cleaning the leaves of her orchids, repotting ferns whose roots had become bound. She ordered dozens of new books on botany and horticulture, losing herself in Latin names and detailed diagrams of root systems. Her life became a series of small, quiet, self-contained tasks. She was building a wall around herself, brick by silent brick. Alistair was, at first, merely puzzled. He was a man who understood systems, ledgers, and predictable outcomes. His wife's sudden withdrawal was an anomaly, a variable he could not account for. Her absence at the dinner table was a disruption to the rigid order of his life. He found himself eating alone in the cavernous dining hall, the silence now feeling less like peace and more like an accusation. He began to notice things he had never noticed before. The way the staff seemed to move more quietly when she was near, a shared conspiracy of deference. The scent of lavender that always lingered faintly in the west wing where her chambers were. The small, exquisite watercolor paintings of flowers and leaves that she left drying in her study. Images of a vibrant, detailed world he had never bothered to enter. One evening, driven by a strange, unfamiliar restlessness, he sought her out. He found her in the library, a room she rarely used, curled in a large wingback chair by the fire. A book lay open in her lap, though she did not appear to be reading. She was simply staring into the flames, her expression serene and distant. "Ilara," he said from the doorway. She looked up, her eyes betraying no surprise. They were calm, clear, and utterly unreadable. "Your Grace," she acknowledged, her voice polite and cool. He stepped into the room, feeling like an intruder in his own home. He carried a small, leather-bound volume in his hand. "I was in the city yesterday. I saw this and thought of you," he said, his voice stiff with unaccustomed effort. He held it out to her. It was a rare edition of a treatise on alpine flora. A month ago, such a gift would have made her heart ache with fragile hope. She took the book, her fingers brushing his for a fleeting, electric moment. He felt the contact like a spark. She, it seemed, felt nothing at all. "That was very thoughtful of you," she said, her tone perfectly even. She glanced at the cover and then placed the book on the small table beside her chair. She did not open it. She did not exclaim over its rarity. She simply set it aside, a finished piece of business. The gesture was more dismissive than any harsh word could have been. It was a clear, quiet statement. "Your offerings have no value here anymore." He stood there, feeling foolish and clumsy. "The steward informs me the roof of the East Gallery requires repair," he said, retreating to the familiar territory of household management. "I am sure you will see to it," she replied, her gaze drifting back to the fire. It was a dismissal, a polite but absolute closing of a door. He lingered for another moment, a duke accustomed to commanding any room, suddenly powerless in this one. Then, with a tight nod, he turned and left, the silence of the library swallowing the sound of his footsteps. The distance between them solidified, becoming a tangible thing, a cold front that had settled permanently over the manor. The breaking point came, as it often did, in public. At the annual autumn ball hosted by the Earl of Ashworth, Ilara had, at Alistair's insistence, accompanied him. She moved through the glittering ballroom with a remote grace, a beautiful, untouchable statue in shimmering silk. Lady Beatrice, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her venom, cornered Ilara near the refreshment table. "Your Grace," she purred, her smile a slash of red. "We see so little of you these days. One might think the Duke keeps you locked away. Or perhaps you simply find our company tedious." The insinuation was clear, a dart aimed at both Ilara's seclusion and Alistair's perceived control. Before Ilara could offer a cool, dismissive reply, Alistair was there. He had moved with a swiftness that was startling, his hand coming to rest lightly on the small of Ilara's back. The gesture was possessive, proprietary. "My wife, Lady Beatrice," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "chooses her company with the same impeccable taste she applies to all things. I suggest you concern yourself with whether you continue to meet her standards, not the other way around." Lady Beatrice paled, her smile faltering. The public rebuke, delivered with such quiet lethality by a man of Alistair's power, was devastating. She stammered an apology and fled. The crowd around them fell into a hushed, fascinated silence. Alistair had defended his wife's honor. On the surface, it was a chivalrous act, but Ilara felt no gratitude. His hand on her back felt like a brand, a mark of ownership. He had not defended her, Ilara. He had defended his Duchess, his possession, from the slight of another. It was an act of pride, not love. The cold in her bones deepened. When they returned to the carriage, the silence was thick and heavy. She sat opposite him, staring out at the passing gaslights, her profile a perfect, unmoving cameo. He could bear it no longer. "Did I not do as you would wish?" he demanded, his voice tight with a frustration he could not name. "I defended you." She finally turned to look at him. Her eyes, in the flickering gloom of the carriage, were like dark pools of water. "You defended the Duchess of Blackwood," she said, her voice quiet but clear as a bell. "You defended your name. It had very little to do with me." Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. He had no reply. She was right, and the knowledge was a shard of ice in his gut. He had acted out of instinct, the territorial reflex of a powerful man whose status had been challenged. He had not once considered her feelings. He had not considered her. He watched her turn back to the window, retreating once more into her impregnable fortress of silence. For the first time, Alistair felt a flicker of something beyond confusion. It was a cold, sharp tendril of fear. He was losing her. Or rather, he was realizing with dawning horror that he had never had her at all. The Duke became a man obsessed. The image of his wife's face in the carriage, calm, distant, and utterly unmoved by his public defense, haunted him. It was the face of a stranger, and he realized with a sickening jolt that he was the one who had made her so. He began a quiet, desperate investigation, a campaign to understand the chasm that had opened between them. He started with the staff. His questions were clumsy at first, his ducal authority making him inept at delicate inquiries. He asked the head housekeeper about his wife's health, her routines. He received polite, starched answers that told him nothing. He sensed a wall of loyalty around Ilara, a protective barrier he himself had no way to breach. His focus narrowed to the day the change had begun. He remembered it clearly, the day of that vicious autumn storm. He remembered her pallor at the dinner table that evening. He remembered his own casual, dismissive comment about the woman on the road. He summoned his coachman, a grizzled man named Peters, who had served the Blackwood family for 40 years. He met him not in the cavernous study, but in the stables, the air thick with the scent of hay and horsehide. "Peters," Alistair began, trying to sound casual, "I wish to ask you about the day of the great storm, a few weeks past, the Tuesday." The old man nodded, his eyes watchful. "I remember it, Your Grace. A terrible downpour." "When we were returning from the village," Alistair continued, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs, "we passed a woman walking on the road. Do you recall?" I do, Your Grace, Peters said slowly. A lone woman, caught in the worst of it. A pitiful sight. Alistair braced himself. Did you happen to see who it was? Peters hesitated, his gaze dropping to the hay-strewn floor. He was a simple man, but he was not a fool. He understood the currents of power and pain that ran through the great house. He knew his answer carried weight. Your Grace, he said, his voice low. It is not my place to say. I am making it your place, Peters, Alistair said, his voice sharp with an urgency that bordered on pleading. The coachman finally met his eyes. Earlier that day, Your Grace, before the rain, I saw the Duchess walking toward the village. She was carrying a small basket. The words hung in the air. The stable, the horses, the scent of hay. It all faded away. Alistair could hear nothing but a roaring in his ears. He saw it all with a sudden gut-wrenching clarity. The small, hunched figure, head bowed against the wind, the dark dress plastered to her frame, the mud sucking at her shoes. The woman he had pitied for her lack of sense. The woman he had splashed with mud and forgotten in an instant. It was her. It was Ilara. The realization was not a thought. It was a physical agony. It was a blade twisting in his gut. He had driven past his own wife in a storm, leaving her on the side of the road like a beggar, and had not even recognized her. The full magnitude of his neglect, his blindness, crashed down upon him. All her quiet withdrawal, her cold politeness, her empty eyes, it all made a terrible, searing sense. He left the stables without another word, striding toward the house, his mind reeling. He had to find her. He had to explain. He had to apologize. He had to do something. He did not even know what. He found her where he should have known she would be, in the conservatory. She was standing with her back to him, carefully trimming a dead leaf from a vibrant pink orchid. The air in the glass house was warm and humid, a stark contrast to the ice that now filled his veins. "Ilara," he said. His voice was hoarse, unfamiliar to his own ears. She turned slowly. Her expression did not change. There was no flicker of surprise or apprehension. It was as if she had been expecting him. He walked toward her, his polished boots loud on the stone floor. He stopped a few feet away, feeling stripped bare, the Duke's impenetrable armor flaking away to reveal the flawed, stupid man beneath. "I know," he began, the words feeling thick and useless in his mouth. "The day of the storm, the woman on the road. It was you." She simply watched him, her silence more unnerving than any accusation. "My God, Ilara, I am so sorry," he whispered, the words raw with a shame so profound it choked him. "I didn't see. I didn't recognize. I would never have. If I had known." He trailed off, the inadequacy of his own words mocking him. She looked at him for a long moment, her gaze direct and unblinking. And then she gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. A profound, weary sadness touched her features. "Oh, Alistair," she said, and her voice was not cold, but filled with a terrible pity. "You still do not understand." He stared at her, utterly lost. "What do I not understand? I left you in the rain. I was a brute, a fool. I am begging for your forgiveness." "That is not the point," she said, her voice gaining a quiet strength. "The point is not that you failed to recognize me that one afternoon. The point is that you have failed to see me for 2 years. That woman on the road? You saw her exactly as you have always seen me, as an inconvenience, an insignificant detail in the landscape of your life, something to be noted and immediately forgotten." He thought nothing of the woman on the road. The phrase echoed in his mind, a damning verdict. She turned back to her orchid, her movements precise and calm. "You are apologizing for the rain," she continued softly. But you are the storm I have been living in since the day I arrived here. A cold, relentless, indifferent storm. She thought nothing of his apology either. His carefully constructed world crumbled to dust at his feet. She was right. His apology was for the symptom, not the disease. The disease was his own heart, a cold, barricaded thing he had kept locked away from everyone, especially her. His desperation finally broke through the dam of his pride. "I never meant to," he said, his voice breaking. "I never meant for any of this." He took a step closer, his hands clenched at his sides. "When I was a young man, before I met you, I was different. I loved someone. Her name was Isabel. We were to be married." Ilara remained still, her back to him, but he knew she was listening. "There was a riding accident," he went on, the words torn from a place he had kept buried for a decade. "She was thrown. I was with her. I held her. As she died. Right there in my arms. After that, something inside me broke. I swore I would never feel that kind of pain again. I built walls around my heart, Alistair. I became this machine, this Duke. I married you out of duty, because it was what was required of me. I thought I could keep you safe by keeping you at a distance. If I did not love you, I could not lose you. I never realized that in trying to protect myself from pain, I was inflicting 1,000 silent injuries on you every single day." He finally fell silent, the confession leaving him hollowed out, exposed. He had shown her the ugly, cowardly truth of himself. He waited for her judgment, her anger, her disgust. Ilara slowly turned to face him. There were no tears in her eyes. Her expression was one of profound, thoughtful sorrow. For the first time, she was not looking at the Duke of Blackwood. She was seeing the broken man who had hidden inside the title for so long. She saw his loneliness, a mirror of her own. But empathy could not erase the scars. Understanding could not magically heal 2 years of wounds. The knowledge of his pain did not negate hers. "I am sorry for your loss, Alistair," she said, and her sincerity was absolute. "I cannot imagine such pain." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But your grief does not give you license to make a ghost of your wife. You did not protect me. You erased me." This was her moment of choice. She could accept his brokenness, try to piece together a life from the fragments of 2 lonely people, or she could save herself. The woman who had waited for him to see her was gone, washed away in that cold rain. In her place was a woman who was finally seeing herself. "I cannot fix you," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "And I will no longer break myself trying to fit into the empty spaces of your life. I need space. I need silence that is born of peace, not absence." His face crumpled. He had expected anger, perhaps, but not this calm, surgical severing. "Ilara, no. Don't leave. I can change. I will change. Let me show you." "Change is not a promise, Alistair. It is an act," she replied. "You have spent years building your walls. I am going to spend some time tending my garden. I will be moving to the dower house on the coast. It is my right." It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. Her catharsis was not in a kiss or a shared embrace. It was in this quiet, unshakable claiming of her own life. She was no longer an object in his world. She was the center of her own. He could only nod, humbled and shattered. He had lost her. And in that loss, he finally, truly saw her. He saw her strength, her resilience, her grace. He saw the incredible woman he had ignored for 2 years, and he knew, with a certainty that was both agony and a sliver of hope, that winning her back would be the most difficult and most important work of his life. 3 months passed. The Dower House was a modest but lovely stone building overlooking the sea. The air was clean and tasted of salt, a constant, refreshing breeze that seemed to blow the dust of Blackwood Manor from Ilara's soul. She spent her days walking the cliffs, collecting shells and starting a new garden, this one filled with hardy, salt-tolerant flowers that thrived in the wind. She was not lonely. For the first time in years, she felt the quiet contentment of her own company. Agnes was with her, a cheerful, grounding presence. She read, she painted, and she watched the endless shifting of the tides, feeling a kinship with their steady, relentless rhythm. Alistair kept his promise. He did not pursue her, did not write demanding letters, did not appear on her doorstep. He gave her the space she had demanded. But he was not absent. Every week a small package would arrive. It was never extravagant. One week it was a set of new sable brushes for her watercolors. Another, a packet of rare seeds for a blue coastal poppy she had once mentioned admiring in a book. He sent her a first edition of a novel by her favorite author, its pages crisp and smelling of old paper and ink. They were quiet offerings, tokens of a man who was finally paying attention. They were not demands for forgiveness, but acts of remembrance. He was showing her, not telling her, that he was learning to see. She accepted them with a quiet, cautious gratitude, the hard sheet of ice around her heart showing the faintest signs of a thaw. One bright, wind-swept morning in early spring, she was in her garden, coaxing the first green shoots from the cool earth, when she heard the sound of a horse. She looked up to see him, standing at the small wooden gate. He was not dressed as a duke. He wore simple riding breeches and a linen shirt, his formal coat left behind. He looked younger, less severe, the sea wind ruffling his dark hair. He did not enter, he simply stood there, his hand resting on the gate, waiting. He was not commanding her attention, he was requesting it. Ilara slowly stood, brushing the dirt from her hands. She walked toward him, her heart beating a steady, even rhythm. The fear and resignation were gone, replaced by a calm curiosity. "Alistair," she said, her voice carried on the breeze. "Ilara," he replied. He offered a small, hesitant smile. It was the first genuine smile she had ever seen on his face. I was hoping you might show me your garden." He was not asking to be let back into her life. He was asking to be let into her world, the one she had built for herself. He was asking to learn the names of her flowers. She looked at him, at the patient hope in his eyes, at the way the sunlight caught the new lines of humility around them. She looked at the sturdy gate between them, a barrier he had given her the power to open or keep closed. She thought of the cold, silent halls of Blackwood Manor, and then of this small, vibrant patch of earth she had cultivated. A person's worth was not defined by the title they held or the house they lived in, but by the life they chose to nurture. She had found her freedom, and perhaps, now, he was beginning to find his. Ilara reached out and lifted the simple wooden latch. The gate swung open. It was not an ending, nor was it a promise of one. It was simply a new beginning, as quiet and as full of potential as the first green shoot of spring.